When you're a teenager, Friday night is all about fun. You hang out with your friends, you go to the mall, you watch movies, and you go cruising. But what about getting murdered? Unfortunately, that is exactly what happened to four teenage girls on December 6th, 1991, in Austin, Texas. This is their story. Hello, I'm Sean, and if you're new here, then welcome. If you are returning, then welcome back. It's good to see you again. Twice a week, I try to research a true crime that I find interesting to tell you about it. I want to make sure that the victims are remembered. There's a lot of victims to be remembered out there. If you're not subscribed, please do so. It's free. I just broke 20,000 subscribers, and that's awesome. I'm elated by it. I appreciate every one of you. And, besides doing it to remember the victims, I'm doing it for you, the viewer. If you want to support me in other ways, I do have a Patreon. It helps keep the lights on. The link is down in the description. And if you ever have any ideas for future crimes, please feel free to leave me a message. I will look into it, and I have done videos from viewer suggestions. This is actually one of them. So I guess that's all I have to say, and now on with today's crime. Before I start, I want to state that this might have some trigger warnings in it, or triggers in it. So this is your trigger warning. Although I try to stay sensitive, some of the stuff that happens in this case is very sensitive. And yes, I do tiptoe around it. But that being said, let's get started. 17-year-olds Eliza Thomas and Jennifer Harbison were working at I Can't Believe It's Yogurt in Austin, Texas on Friday, December 6th, 1991. During a quick break, Jennifer went to a local mall and picked up her 15-year-old sister, Sarah. Sarah and her friend, 13-year-old Amy Ayers, was, doing what any other kid did back in 91, going through the mall. So Jennifer came, picked him up when the mall closed, and brought him back to the yogurt shop. Sarah and Amy, just sat around talking and helped a little bit because Eliza and Jennifer were trying to close up for the night because they closed at 11 o'clock at night. And that is that until a little bit before midnight. An Austin police officer noticed that there was a fire at I Can't Believe It's Yogurt. He reported it to dispatch, and the fire department came and extinguished the fire. Inside the shop, the firefighters discovered 4 nude or partially nude bodies that had been burnt terribly bad. One of the first detectives that was on the scene was John Jones. He was here this evening and did the majority of the investigation through a lot of it. The water, unfortunately, had to be used to put out the fire, but it also did away with much of the evidence. So they didn't have much to go on here. Jennifer, Sarah, and Eliza were located together. 2 of them were actually on top of each other, and the other one was just kind of right off of their bodies. Also, two of them were bound with their hands behind their back, tied up with what they believe were the girls' panties. They were also gagged with some clothing in their mouth. Each of them had a bullet wound execution style in the back of their heads, and they determined later on that it was caused by a .22 caliber pistol. All three of them were severely charred, and they had to be identified through dental records because they could not identify who they were just from seeing their body. There was also evidence that at least one, if not all of them, had been R-worded. Amy, who was the youngest out of the group, she was in the next section of the shop. She wasn't charred, but 30% of her body was at least second or third degree burns. She had clothing tied around her neck, but she wasn't choked out. They just had it tied around her neck. She also had been shot in the back of the head with a .22, but autopsy determined that it had missed the brain. So they killed her with a second shot, and that was used by a .380 pistol. What they're believing is that all four of them were in the same spot, and when they lit them on fire, she was faking to be dead, but she crawled away from the fire, and that's when the suspects shot her. Fire investigators found that the suspect or suspects used lighter fluid for the fire. They think that what the killer did was place styrofoam cups on the bodies and filled those up with lighter fluid. And then they covered the bodies up with plates and cardboard and soaked all that with lighter fluid before they lit it all on fire. The lighter fluid and styrofoam make like a napalm, I guess, and it sticks to any surface and it burns with a higher heat. At least this is what the fire investigator thought, and this explains some of the extent of the damage to their bodies. Another thing that I saw in one article is that whoever did this even like poured chocolate syrup and other things on the girls' deceased bodies. So, an extremely sick individual no matter what. Witnesses came forward. A couple who left the store right before closing time at 11 o'clock said that there had been two men sitting at the table talking, and when police got there, they noticed that all the chairs were up on the tables, like most stores when they clean up, except for one table. And the cops also noticed that the back door was unlocked. The police investigators came up with a large number of persons of interest, but usually when a crime like this happens, a lot of people call in and say that they did it. So they had to weed through of it. And many of the leads led nowhere. There was a 15-year-old boy who was arrested like a week or a couple days later because he had a 22 caliber pistol and he was brandishing it at the mall. They did determine that it was not the gun used in the murders, so they let him go. And it was years later when the detectives actually came up with 4 suspects who were all teenagers in 1991, but now were well into their 20s. Various detectives conducted interviews with these 4 men and eventually obtained confessions. The 4 suspects were Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Maurice Pierce, and Forrest Welborn. All of these men were interrogated back in 1991, but the police have no record of what was said during this. So the current detectives had no way to find out if the previous detectives had provided any crime scene information to the suspects so they could easily say, oh, yeah, well, I did this and this and this. And then the future detectives were like, oh, okay, then that means you must have done it. So, I mean, they had no correlation on how much knowledge that these people had, these suspects had from the 1991 interrogation. In all the stuff I read, I could not figure it out, but only 2 of the 4 suspects went to trial. Springsteen and Scott went to trial. The other 2 were let go. The only real evidence that they could use against the guys were their own confessions. Springsteen was sentenced to death, and Scott got life imprisonment. He was only 15 at the time, so they couldn't give him the death penalty, I guess. Unfortunately, both convictions were overturned and they were freed in 2009. Why was it overturned? Because of confrontation clause. Now, I had to look this up. I did not actually know the meaning of confrontation clause, but in the 6th Amendment of the Constitution, it states, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to be confronted with the witnesses against him. And I've heard that. I just didn't realize it was called the confrontation clause. So in this proceeding, the prosecution used the other guy's statements against each other. So they were tried separately and were not at each other's trials, so they could not confront each other. So Springsteen would say something about Scott, and they used it in Scott's trial, but Scott could not say anything, question Springsteen about it. So this was the reason they got out of prison. Well, I guess that's possibly a good thing too, because the prosecution was going to retry them, but at that time they tested their DNA versus the DNA that was found inside of at least one of the victims, and it did not match these guys. So they were going to be exonerated eventually anyway because of that. And the DNA did not match the other 2 guys from before. So another reason that they were freed was because of an interrogator named Hector Palancho. Palancho had just recently been accused of coercing false confessions from suspects in previous cases. I didn't read much into it, but one podcaster that I listened to said that he would threaten them and wear them out enough so they would just confess to whatever. And That's not good. Um, a false confession is not a confession. So they're back down to the drawing board of who the suspects were that did this. So another possible suspect was Kenneth McDuff, who was a known serial killer in the area. And he had a history of killing teens, but he was ruled out. I don't know why, but he was ruled out. I actually checked in on this guy, and he did do a killing like a few months before this in Austin. So he was there in the area, and it seemed that for the majority of his killings, he had somebody like an accomplice with him, at least with 4 of his murders. So I don't know why they ruled him out, but they did. On February 5th of 2022, the FBI announced that because of advanced DNA technology, it was bringing them closer to solving the crime. Apparently, the current DNA testing that they have with the sample from the crime scene matched hundreds of males, which doesn't help the situation or narrow it down. And they sealed those findings because there was only so many markers that it connected to, and it brought up hundreds of people. Well, most of these are volunteers that volunteered DNA to put it into this database that they're using. And just because they have some familial DNA, I guess how I'm saying this or how I understand it is it could be DNA that would match me, but then it would match my son, it would match my dad, it match my grandfather, and on down the line. So I mean, there's hundreds of people that it could match. So is that the family line that could have been? I don't know. They sealed it, and they said as soon as technology gets enough or better, they will fine tune it. More than 1,000 people attended the church service for the girl's funeral. 6 months later, even more people showed up at the candlelight vigil. Can't speak. The company that ran the yogurt shop put up a reward for any leads, and they also never reopened that location. The building has changed owners throughout the years, but nothing has really taken off there. I believe that there's a hair salon there now. I think that's what it is. A plaque for the girls was placed across the parking lot from where the shop was located. People stopped by and put flowers on it and things like that. So, Detective John Jones has since retired, but still has a medallion of the girls on his desk. These 4 girls are deeply missed by their family and their friends. The class of 1992 left 2 chairs empty for Jennifer and Eliza. The freshman class was also missing Sarah, and the middle school was missing Amy. All 4 girls were heavily involved with Future Farmers of America, FFA. They were smart, they were strong, they were feisty, and they were outdoorsy. What happened that night between 11 p.m. and 12 a.m.? Somebody knows something. Somebody has been holding on this for way too long. Whether it's you or somebody you know, it needs to be aired now. Give everyone closure. You know, if you or someone you know is the one who did this, you've had 33 years to live. You took 33 years from 4 girls. 33 years, they could have kids of their own now. They could be grandparents. 33 years, you know. So if you know who it is, gotta say something. What happens if one of these girls was your child? Any information can be called into 512-472-TIPS. That's 512-472-8477. On August 3rd, 2022, President Biden signed the Homicide Victims Family Rights Act into law. It is said that it was actually motivated by the yogurt shop murders. The law is to help families get federal law enforcement to review old cold cases using the latest technologies. I really hope that this can help those families get some closure, and hopefully they'll be able to get this case closed eventually. And to the families and friends of Amy Ayers, Eliza Thomas, Jennifer Harbison, and Sarah Harbison, I'm so sorry for your loss. I can't imagine your pain. Thank you for watching. If you're not subscribed, please do so. Be good to yourself. Be good to others. I love you all. I will see you next time. Bye.